We are live now, doctor.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to all of you to today's webinar. It's our debut webinar of the Research Matrix 1.0. And for those who are inquisitive about what exactly the webinar is about and what exactly the series is about, let me introduce you to it. So this is basically us trying to take you into the research matrix and solve all the general queries that everybody has related to the basics of research. The aim of the webinar series is to make sure that we put together the important prerequisites of research together for you all, especially for the young budding researchers, and to take forward your queries. Most of the webinar series is completely going to be based on a debate segment, followed by the different scenarios that everybody faces in their daily research life. And the aim is also to make it easier for everybody to start liking research. And I hope that we are able to achieve that. And I request Dr. Apurva Achit to please introduce the faculty for today.
Can I share my screen with the presentation that or you can share it yourself, I think.
Go ahead.
Okay. I didn't. Okay. So our first panelist is Dr. Santosh Honawar. He needs no introduction. It's a stellar panel and he is one of them today. He is the director of oculoplasty and oculo-oncology at CFS Hyderabad. He's been on the top 2% of the Stanford list of scientists in India for the last 3 years. He has over 270 publications and the first Indian to win a Lifetime Achievement Award by the AAO in 2019. Next, we have Dr. Sayan Basu, who is the director, Professor Brian Holden Eye Research Center, and the director for the Center for Ocular Regeneration at LV Prasad Eye Institute. He is also amongst the top 2% of world scientists in the Stanford list and has more than 280 scientific publications. Next panelist is Dr. Sabyasachi Sengupta, also known as Sunny fondly. He is a consultant vitreoretina at his own practice. He's the founder of Sengupta's Research Academy. He is also amongst the top 2% world scientists in the Stanford list and has more than 120 publications, and we all know him as the associate editor of IJO in the last 2 terms. Next, we have Dr. Parthopratim Majumdar, sir. He is a senior consultant luminary in the field of uvea, founder and chief editor of eOphtha, which we all know has more than 200 publications and has been a section editor of IJO. Next is Dr. Sonal. She was the president of YOSI for a long time, immediate past president. She's been a young achiever at several conferences and has won several Best Surgical Video Awards and Poster Awards. And we all know her as a very passionate anterior segment surgeon. And next is me. I am a consultant at Joshi Eye Institute. I work in retina. I have some publications and some awards as well. Next is Dr. Dr. Rolika is actually this whole research cell is her and Dr. Ayushi's brainchild, and she is currently a research fellow in one second, please. Yeah, in oculofacial and reconstructive surgery at UCSD San Diego, and she's a very a budding prolific researcher. Has got more than 50 awards and is on more than 90 research projects, and she's an executive member of YOSI. Then we have Dr. Ayushi, another star in the field of oculoplastics. She has achieved a lot in the last couple of years, has a lot of index publications and several awards for her research. And I think she's been one of the, I think if I remember correctly, something about being the top fellow or chief fellow in LVPI for 2 years and the best researcher at LVPI for 2 years, amongst the fellows, that is. We have Dr. Anujit, a very active member of YOSI for several years now. He's a consultant cataract and vitreoretina services at BBI Foundation, Kolkata. And he has 30 PubMed index publications and is a section editor in Retina at TNJOA, and he's the recipient of TNOA Gold Medal as well. Has received the IGO Platinum Award. Dr. Drishti is a current glaucoma fellow at Shroff Charity Eye Center, New Delhi, and has 6 publications already, goody, and 1 book chapter. And she's received an Excellence in Research certificate. Welcome, everyone, and it's been a pleasure introducing such a stellar panel. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Purva. Thank you for explaining our research cell. This is the first time we do the introduction for the research cell so that you all know that all the people have put in their hard work to put this together for you. And while Dr. Apurva explains our next step, which is going to be the debate between me and Ayushi, so I request Apurva ma'am to please brief us about the debate while I share my screen.
Right. So this was a very interesting debate, and this is something at least I am on the fence about, and I'm very keen to hear Rolika and Ayushi's views on it so that I can finally make up my mind. The topic is whether authorship order matters. So without further ado, I think we'll dive straight into their views and find out whether it does matter. Rolika?
Thank you so much. So, while we go into the debate part, let me just introduce you to the concept of this debate. So, I will be taking the part where I'm for the topic, and Ayushi is going to take the part where she's against the topic. And we're just going to try to emphasize the importance of the topic that we have taken up. So, here, this is me, my affiliations, and the disclaimer is that I have no financial or personal interests. So before we go further, the topic of today is authorship order matters now and forever. And I am talking for the topic. But let's play devil's advocate and let's see what against has to say. So let me talk to you about few examples, which I'm sure that some of you, rather all of you, would have faced and witnessed in life. A resident or a fellow works day in and day out and then writes a manuscript, but the fellow resident has to go as a second author, or may not even need to be included, because he doesn't need that paper for departmental promotions as yet. Is that so? Who cares? A senior resident helps the junior resident write an article, but at the time of publication, shifts to another unit. Now the corresponding author doesn't need to worry about adding yet another author to the paper, correct? Who cares? Started the project with 3 researchers, but the head of the department, who has nothing to do with the project, suddenly needs to be added also as a courtesy. Is that right? Who cares? Let's add an author. Now we need Dr. H, who is Dr. H index max, as co-author for higher chances of acceptance of a paper. Because you know his reputation is par excellence. Add him just like that. I'll speak with him. Who cares? An external ophthalmologist helped with statistical analysis for manuscript only, just the statistics, but did not contribute to the paper writing part, right? Eliminate her from the final paper. Who cares? So in these 5 scenarios, we can see who cares. Well, this was a devil part, but I would say we care. And how do we care and why do we care? Let's take one by one. In the first scenario, the first author is always the author. The one who writes it becomes the first author. The second scenario is called ghost authorship, wherein the senior resident who actually helped in writing the resident is now no more a part of it because the corresponding author thought so, is called ghost authorship. We cannot do that, highly unethical. The third one is a gift authorship. It's like you start the project, but you're including somebody who's not a part of the research from the beginning, is called gift authorship. The fourth scenario is when you're actually adding somebody because you want the acceptance to be higher. That's called guest authorship. And the fifth scenario is when you have statistical analysis done by somebody, they have put in their time and efforts, and what do you have? That's just unethical. You must make sure that you give good credit and good courtesy to everybody who's involved. So keeping these things in mind, we must remember what is ethical and what is not ethical. I say that time is authorship. But I've also been taught today that it's not just time, but also the contribution which makes the authorship that is significant. Now, let's just start with the basics part of it, which, of course, my opponent might not agree with. And that is the research inception is always you form a team. How do you start a particular research? So, you always have to follow the ICGME guidelines. The research team, that is the OG team, always remains the same. These are the people who started it off. Everybody who starts it from day one becomes a part of the paper till the end. Only the deserving individuals with significant contributions along the way keep getting added. So it's about like, starts with three, maybe a few people join, but their contributions should be kept in mind. But no one gets eliminated ever. Always remember that. So always start with the basics with the research inception kept in mind. I prefer the concept of having a spreadsheet and keep updating it. Make sure that you're going to forget about it. I'm sure that for example, Dr. Hanavar has done a project, say, like 5 years back. In 5 years, different fellows have come and gone and been a part of it. So he has taught us that you keep the names added in it. So he keeps adding the names, and we all know that who all have been a part of it before. Similarly, the next step is the first and corresponding author. First author, maximum contribution, and the one who writes the manuscript. Corresponding author is the one who operates on the patients, owns the data, or has cared for the patients as a primary doctor or surgeon. Courtesy makes the right roots. Always remember and forever. The timeline matters. Define your timeline about a research. It's a very ethical thing to do. Every co-author must contribute by reminding about the timeline. Sometimes the papers get lost in time. Don't hold back on the work when it's your turn, or else inform the team that, hey, there's some holdback here. I might get back to you with it, but my timeline isn't intact. Review by all. Every single person who is a part of the authorship list must review the paper in different ways and they must participate in different ways. So avoid research as gifts. You have better things to gift, but not a research. So be innovative and buy them better presents. Take due consent before submission. That's the most ethical, important thing to do. Documentation is very important at every step. No consent can get you in trouble, but you should have it written. And teamwork makes the dream work. Any missed co-author has the right to challenge the work with the journal, and then can lead to serious allegations and blacklisting of the authors. So keep these ethical things in mind, because when you talk about ethics, if you follow them correctly, you will end up having a research which is absolutely with an expert basis, highly citable, sharp, and unique in its own way, and precise, and it keeps you sane always. So it's all about the ethics. So we keep ethics into the matrix, and thank you everyone for listening. And over to Ayushi for the second part.
Thank you, Rolika. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Hello, everyone. At the outset, I want to thank Rolika for giving me the tougher side of the topic, as I have a broader perspective now. So, does authorship order matter now and forever? Probably it does, but not always. As we have now moved to an era of collaborative research, the order becomes more subjective, more open to abuse, and inadequate to determine the true credit when it is due. This is a very beautiful article that talks about all of which matters over an authorship order. Collaborative research is more complex, often because often we tend to include co-authors that do not even tend to fulfill the ICMGE criteria. So there are 3 of them, and one must fulfill all of them laid down by the ICMGE ethical standards, and that is the harsh and the current reality. Another scientific trend is the hyper-authorship. So the word hyper-authorship was actually coined by Blaise Cronin in 2001 for more than 100 authors, which can be from different countries. So this is actually a physics paper. And guess how many authors does it have? 5,000. So how do you justify contribution based on the order here? Who for thought. Another important subject of debate is the middle authorship. Honestly, there have been times when my contemporaries have approached me and asked me that, I'm just a middle author. Why should I even be a part of it? Because middle authors are often judged for lesser contributions in the research society. So to combat that, we have variable formats available. Authorship order can be alphabetical. It can be based on person contribution indicated, or the FLAE approach, that is the first last author emphasis that most of us follow. So this proves that there is no particular order which is the right order. Now comes the true essence of why we even do research: to make an impact and contribute something meaningful to the science, right? And to measure that objectively, we have our ever evolving bibliometrics, which is usually independent of the authorship order. So another example that I want to give is during my virtual research training, our professor had asked us to had divided us into teams and gave us an exciting role play. So there were two senior authors, Dr. John, who was the cardiologist, and Dr. Doe, the gastroenterologist. And both of them had conceptualized an experiment and almost had equal contribution to the research. And now the tiff falls between who becomes the senior and corresponding author. We were sent to our breakout rooms, and at the end of 20 minutes, we were asked only one question: did you or did you not reach a common ground? And that is when we realized that we have to look at the bigger picture. Sometimes your interest needs to be put aside for your team, and you need to be a good team player before you are a researcher. Lastly, do not compare apples and oranges. Unfortunately, we do not have a standard way of framing authorship order. And when you take your print of your publications to other parts of the world, the evaluation context changes. There are regional variations that make comparison cumbersome. And moreover, there is no global legal system that says that, okay, this is the right authorship order. So yes, the authorship order is currently a mess, but it is evolving. And what we should be really focusing on is the gift authorship, the ghost authorship, the guest authorship, anonymous and theft authorship, which is beautifully mentioned in this article that was published in the Indian Journal of Ophthalmology in 2021. And what really matters, according to me, are the 4 C's. Contributorship. Are you even eligible to be an author? Collaboration, because that is the current trend. How much you can contribute to the science, that is your impact as a researcher. And last but not the least, how well you can communicate with the team and form a good research team. To conclude, I would just say that scientific research is a dynamic process. You will often shift from the left to the right in the order, but what you need to remember is to embrace it with dignity and ethics. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we both had this concept where we were finding it difficult for Ayushi to go against the topic. And at the end, we do conclude and agree that authorship order does matter in its own peculiar way. Is that right, Ayushi?
Yes, but not always.
Right. So I would now head to the expert panelists and take their opinion about the same. Dr. San Basu, sir, what do you have to say about the debate part and the points that have been put forth?
Hey,
Hey,
points
first
have
of
been
all,
put.
sorry,
Sam.
go ahead. No. I thought, do you want me to go ahead or is
No,
Dr.
it's
Honavar?
okay. Please go ahead.
So, this is a wonderful format and a great question. I was listening to both sides very with a lot of interest, and I think all of you made excellent points. Very quickly, what I have to say on this is that, of course, I think the premise of the question and the debate is, of course, to raise opposing views on the topic. But I guess the premise is that at the bottom of everything, that obviously authorship matters and there are ethical concerns regarding it, and you don't want to be unfair to anyone who's involved in that research. So it matters to a very large extent. And I think that, the first thing that needs to be sorted or people need to be clear in their head when they're doing research is essentially the first author and the corresponding author position. The corresponding author should be straightforward because it's the person who owns the idea and whose lab the research is going on and who heads the group and so on and so forth. And the first author is the person who, works hardest, writes the paper or generates the data. But ultimately, it comes down, it's the prerogative and the responsibility of the corresponding author to make sure that everybody is who deserves to be an author is included as an author. Those people who need to be acknowledged but do not qualify as an author are acknowledged. And like you rightly mentioned, that, in groups that are highly collaborative, like I can tell you about myself, if you look at my publications in the last 2 or 3 years, a bulk of them are collaborations with 2 or 3 external groups. And collaboration, compromise is key to collaboration. So in many cases, I have given up the corresponding authorship just for the, general, for the future of that collaboration, or that we have shared first authorship between people of two groups so that both sides are acknowledged and you avoid these kind of contentious issues or conflicts, etc. So there are ways that you can share first authorship or corresponding authorship also to include more people or make more people happy. But ultimately, I think the responsibility of ensuring fairness is the corresponding authors. And I think that those people who take up this responsibility or want to be corresponding authors also understand the responsibility that comes with it. So I think if you have somebody who understands the responsibility of corresponding author, these problems usually don't crop. But I'll end by saying that yes, of course, it matters.
Right. Thank you, sir. And I would say that Dr. Basu has highlighted about the first and the corresponding authorship part absolutely perfectly. And now my question would be to Dr. Honavar. What do you think about the sequence in between? And I think Dr. Apurva has also mentioned it in her question. We know about the end and the beginning, but what about the ones in between? How do you decide it for your research projects?
No, for me, it's very clear. I decide based on the amount of contribution of each of these authors. For the manuscript, not just for the manuscript, but for the research aspect as well. There are people who would have collected data, but they may not be good at writing stuff or correcting stuff. If somebody has collected all the data but not good at writing or correction of the manuscript stuff, then he could or she could still be the second author. So it all depends on the relative contribution of each author. And I would put the senior authors towards the end and would give authorship to junior authors. That is one way of prioritizing. And there could be two first authors. Currently, you can share first authorship, you can share even corresponding authorship. If there are two people who have done equal amount of work, you could give them equal credit as first author. That's also possible. But the middle sometimes become contentious because, it doesn't matter to anybody except the authors themselves because, it's et al. In many of the journals, after 3 authors, you have to put et al. And in some of the journals, it's after 6. In some journals, it's 4. But well, you don't want to get into that category of et al. You want to be in the first 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 so that your name is quoted and you want to see your name in print.
Right.
So that's possibly a kind of need for some of the junior authors. So I would put them first rather than the senior authors first.
Right, sir. And my next question would be for Dr. Sen Gupta, sir. Do you think that a lot of people focus a lot on like putting their name or being cited with their name et al. In the manuscript? For example, as Dr. Onava mentioned, do you think that people care so much about, like, say, Sen Gupta et al.? This Sen Gupta et al. Stated that. And what do you have to say to the students who focus a lot on that part and not the essence of research?
Yeah, so I would really say that if you want it to be that way, you better put in the work, and don't expect to get first authorship without putting in that much work. So I think for the juniors, it's important to understand how much work it takes to become the first author. And so you need to put in almost all the work in every step. So collecting data to analyzing data to making the plan, making the results, writing the rest of the story, the referencing, and almost everything else. So you take ownership of it, you lead, and therefore you qualify as being the first author. And the mentoring author should be the last author. So it could be the thesis guide or the most senior person in the group who is actually taking the mantle, like Dr. Sayan was saying, takes the responsibility and owns up to the responsibility. So the mentoring author really is the last author, and in between is again how much contribution has the person done. If it's a single study from a single center, it's a bit different. If it's a large collaboration between many different centers, then it's again slightly different. So now how I look at it is, so I get a lot of people together to write large collaborative papers. So so how many patients is that center sort of contributing to the whole study? Accordingly, we would think about those groups as the people ahead in the queue. So if it's say a group with say 1,000 cases, but then it's possible that one out of those has collaborated or sort of contributed 300 patients, and the others have done say like 15, 30, 45, and in the overall there are a large number of patients there. So so one prime example was the mucormycosis study, which was done at an all India level, where there were like 2,800 contributions, right? But then the people who took the lead and actually went ahead and designed the study and took it up the mantle and got the primary authorship, right? So how much work are you putting in? Only you can know, right, as a contributing author. So compared to others, if you have put in more work, then you deserve to be a little bit ahead in the queue. But then again, like sir said, it's a bit contentious, and we are not really sure where to put all of them. So the larger the number of authors, the more difficult it is to satisfy everybody. But overall, if you have put in the work, then you should qualify as a leading author, one or two or three. And in between, again, it really is. So as a contributing author or as a corresponding author, that's what I tend to do. I sort of grade people in terms of how much input they have put in each step. And you can even do a scoring or something like that, and then come up with, and this should be clear right at the beginning. When you're putting it together, like
Right.
so if you contribute more, you will get lead authorship, right? So then it's also like a it's an impetus for people to do more. So that's sort of my take on the whole thing.
Right. And I would just say this part, like, as the three of you have very well, formed the concept that technically all the authors are important. And Dr. Basu has also put in a comment. It's actually very true. Every single person is important. Any research cannot be carried out without those people. And honestly, if you ask me, the authorship order, more than that, your contribution should be the highlight. It should be all of us thinking in the same way that we are actually adding good literature to the existing pool of literature. And that's when the best of researchers come out. And also, if the people who are, like, say, back in the authorship and the article is good, you're still going to get cited equally. It's not the first author who's getting the citations, you're still going to get your citations in. So the paper that you have mentioned, so all the 426 authors on that list are actually getting the citations equally as the first author. So that also matters because they contributed and they gave in their time. Now, the last question in this context will be to Dr. Parthapratim, sir, and that would be related to the residents. What is your message to the residents who are doing their thesis? How should they go about, because they're the babies in the field, right? They've just stepped in. They do not know how to go about things. They do not know how to ask for authorship. And sometimes they're not really treated equally. They're not treated in a wise way, or they're not, handled correctly by the thesis guide or somebody who is mentoring them. What would be your suggestion to them?
I think it's little complicated, Rolika, to answer these questions, because this question you are asking in terms of authorship, right?
Mm-hmm.
So see, the problem here happens is two things. The main, if you analyze that, why there is some problem occurs in authorship criteria is mainly because of two things. One is the pressure to publish, the so-called that publish or perish culture. The second is misunderstanding the authorship criteria. So these two are the main reason. And you'll agree with me that many get a thrill seeing their name as a me at all. For example, if I take my example, so there is a tendency to see people that getting cited their work in an article as a Datta Majumdar et al. Or somebody. So I call it a me at all dopamine. So, and that sometimes what happens that in hierarchical system, the senior researchers or the supervisor or the thesis guide sometimes insist on an authorship, and despite not fulfilling the criteria. And as a postgraduate and the junior researcher, sometimes it is very difficult until and unless the guide or the supervisor, he himself doesn't understand that what does mean by the first authorship. So it is sometimes very difficult, and unfortunately, many of the time I keep seeing that people suffer from senior people suffer from this kind of ignorance bliss, and offering a quick hit of, you can call it a cheap research dopamine. So it happens. It's very difficult to do something for the postgraduates or the young researchers to do something, because it has to come from the senior level, that they need to understand that what is the meaning of research, the first author, what is the role of the corresponding author. So I think it is very difficult for a postgraduate student or the fellow.
Right. And I would just close this part as by saying that I think that as the babies or the absolute young ones or the residents who are starting off their research work, I guess it's okay even if you're not the first author. And it's okay if you're not getting the courtesy or credit that you deserve in the first place, because that's just the beginning. And you learn with every single manuscript that you write. So if you're getting the lessons out of a manuscript, be happy and try not to focus on the authorship part. This is where I'm playing the devil's advocate, by the way. But that's where we go forward with it. Due courtesy is what is we keep in mind. And I will go ahead with the research matrix scenarios. Ayushi, would you like to introduce the matrix scenarios till I open my share my screen?
So we have 4 case scenarios to each of the experts.
So these are the case scenarios that we will be putting up, and to one expert panelist each, and the others are free for discussion as well. So they've been drafted on the basis of the usual scenarios that occur, and most of the residents who ask us questions or the fellows who ask us these questions. So the first scenario is for Dr. Sabyasachi Sengupta, sir. So you're around, right? Perfect. So the first scenario is that Dr. XYZ is a reviewer for a high impact factor journal. And he receives an article which includes a large cohort from a country where English is not the first language. And Dr. XYZ notices that the manuscript language is completely written through AI. It has been written by artificial intelligence, which has been checked by the AI detection softwares. Word to word, there's something wrong about it, but it is very strong on statistics. That means that it's good information, but language and every single thing written is through AI. What would you do next? And we do know that you're the expert in this part, so the question goes to you.
Well, I don't know whether I'm the expert, but then I know a little bit about statistics. So, first and foremost, it appears that major high impact factor journals don't have a blinded or a masked review. And therefore, that this is from a non-English, the authors, right? So then, that is something that the entire, the editorial community sort of needs to take a look at, where, it's important to have blinded or masked reviews. There are pros and cons of it, but then overall, if the editor knows it, it's good enough. I think the reviewers need not know, where the paper is coming from. And so, this might actually be negated. Overall, if you use AI for paraphrasing and not for actually generating original content, it's like you just say, what do you know about, say, mixed surgery, or what do you know about, can you give me a literature review on, say collagen cross-linking? And then there are many websites which actually give you everything, say 1.5 page worth of information along with referencing and, pretty much everything there is to know about it. And, so that is like, I think that's cheating. So then, you're not putting in enough work by yourself. So it's sort of hard to differentiate that from, so if you have paraphrased it and not actually used a software, it's kind of okay. And a lot of journals like the American Journal and British Journal and Ophthalmology, as well as large like New England Journal and all, they want you to declare that we have used some form of AI to paraphrase this or improve the English language. And so if that has been acknowledged by the authors, then I would still say, I would still review the paper as if they have not done anything wrong. And of course, the statistics being strong is, sometimes, that's also a bit subjective where, for someone it's strong, but for others it may be very weak. So then, given that the statistics are really strong, and the information that is being put out is actually going to contribute to betterment of science, I would not put I would not put a red tape just for the English bit of it. But then, if it is something that I find it's not a copy paste job, but then it's perhaps entirely derived, and this is a gray area as of now, because Authenticate cannot actually tell us whether it's paraphrased or it's actually entirely generated on its own. So the best place to look for this is the discussion, because the introduction can be entirely generated. The methods, this not, you can actually copy paste it from some other journal as well. Results are sometimes, we look at the tables and figures, and that's where the statistics come in. But the discussion is where, we will really know the mettle of the authors, where have they actually, looked at the positives or the negatives or whatever they want to concentrate on, and how are they fitting all of this into existing literature. That is where you have to write it yourself. And then you can tell the AI, can you just modify this, or you can paraphrase this or improve it. So the discussion is where I would actually look at and see whether they have actually generated the whole thing, because the discussion sometimes is woeful while the interaction looks totally polished. And the last place that looks exceedingly woeful is the abstract, where there are a lot of conventions to writing the abstract, and a lot of them are perhaps not followed. And sometimes there are only p values, but there are no means and there are no metrics. And sometimes there are only metrics and there are no p values, things like that. So that actually tells me that the authors are perhaps, the initial part, which is impressive, and the English bit is entirely driven by AI and not by the authors themselves. And the discussion is pretty poor. So the abstract and the discussion will differentiate this gray zone for me. And then, if it is poorly written, the discussion, then of course I'll, point it out that this appears to be AI generated, and though the statistics are strong, it's not good enough. Lastly, as I'll show in some of my workshops, you can generate entire statistics without knowing a word about it. And then you can actually generate amazing graphs, figures, tables without knowing anything about statistics. So AI can do that for you. You need to understand what AI to use, what prompts to give it. And a statistician can tell you that, this is so, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. It could be a strong statistics as well, right? So overall, I would look at not just the English, but the discussion and the abstract, and also the statistics, and then make a decision whether I want to review it, and then whether I want to actually make a decision out of it.
Right. Ayushi, would you like to go to the next question? Thank you, Sunny sir. That was absolutely what we wanted to hear from you. Thank you, sir. Ayushi, over to you.
Can you change the slide?
Yep.
So I want to ask this question to Dr. Parthu, sir. Dr. ABC is a reviewer for a reputed journal. He or she receives a manuscript to review, the subject of which is very similar to a study being conducted as his or her own institution currently. Dr. ABC puts the review manuscript on hold and hastens his own study submission to another high-impact journal. Once his own paper got accepted, he resumed the review of the previous manuscript. So, sir, is this ethical, and how often do you think it happens?
No, it's absolutely unethical. It's no question about it. But means I have heard stories. Sometimes it has happened in actually medicine. If you see go by the history, also similar thing has happened in medical history also. So it is not very means the situation which you have given me is it can happen with anyone, but it is absolutely unethical. There is no doubt about it. I'll suggest if somebody is working on some project and he receives a similar study for reviewing, I think one best way will be to just send it back to the editor, that he can actually reject it also to review it. And second thing is, even if you reviews, he should not actually put it on hold and all. He can critically review it also. if he's a very honest reviewer, I think he can critically review it also and send it back to editor. But it's absolutely unethical. He means what you have described. Means one is not supposed to put this on hold or just hasten their own study to submission into another journal.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Ayushi, you can go for the next question as well.
Yeah. I want to ask this question to Dr. Honavar, sir. So a research team has worked on the retrospective analysis of 6,700 patients of retinal detachment and have assessed more than 200 variables. So they noticed that multiple useful and highly citable studies can be published using the same data set to add to existing pool of literature. So is this salami slicing or is this ethical? And if this is ethical, then what is salami slicing?
Well, I mean, if it's a very large study, you cannot put all the data together and make a very large paper. Sometimes that is not acceptable. Journals want very concise papers, and there has to be a kind of very objective analysis of data pointing towards that, results everything. So you can't have too much of data in a particular paper which may not be publishable. As long as the outcome measures are different, and there is data enough to justify salami slicing, it is acceptable. It's neither new, it's not culpable also. It's been done by many authors. It's been a standard practice to divide a data of a large study and publish it in bits, which finally are put together in the sense that it solves a overall research question in bits and pieces. And these articles are published in not a particular order, but maybe in even different journals. Otherwise, they would give it the study number, particular study, paper number 1, paper number 2, etc., until the entire series gets published.
So if
it's
we have
not totally unethical, but if you intentionally do it with a very slim amount of data, if you want to publish 2 or 3 articles with scanty data in each of these, then it can be considered salami slicing.
Okay, so if I have a small data set, but multiple outcome measures, because it's small, it would be slicing.
Yes.
Okay.
And Dr. Honavar, just an addendum question in the same thing, that how would you decide the authorship in it? Like if there are say this entire series data collection was done by 3 people, but the analysis was done by somebody else and the papers are eventually written by different people along the way because nobody can go ahead and publish all of it. It might just take years to publish it. How do you think that you would decide the authorship in this situation?
Again, depending totally on the amount of contribution of each author. The person who writes it, collects data, gets the first authorship. The mentor or the guide or the person who has conceptualized the research gets the he's the corresponding author. Everybody else comes in the middle, depending on the extent of contribution.
Right. And we do have a question from Dr. Apurva on the previous topic. And I think Dr. Basu, I would request you to answer the question. That is, she said that what about getting a manuscript for review, stealing the idea, making a quick paper out of it, and publishing it before the one that came for the review? How do we know that if our research ideas are safe in this situation, especially when it is a novel surgical technique, which probably everybody's trying to do? And or an innovation in diagnostics.
So you're asking if this is kosher, if this is okay, or
Yeah,
what can we do
how
about
do
it?
you go about it that
It's a question, sir. How do we know that when we publish, our research is safe with the board of reviewers and editorial board?
Yeah, so the code of ethics, I mean, in general, people who are professional, part of editorial boards or the journal itself, their editorial team, will not allow this to happen. But it is not impossible that something like this can happen. I've heard about this happening rarely. That essentially what you're suggesting is you submit something very innovative to a journal, and the reviewer who's looking at it or the editor who's looking at it steals your idea, stalls your paper, and basically publishes it before your paper can progress or see the light of day. So theoretically it can happen. I'm sure that rarely it has happened. It is Obviously something that is not correct should not happen. People who are in these positions should be professional enough not to do such things. But if it does happen, you wouldn't know who the reviewer is. So that's the problem, right? But if you suspect something like that has happened, that someone you gave something, that a person is among the reviewers or on the editorial board, and that person comes out with a publication very similar to what you submitted somewhere. If you have some hint of it, you can always write to the editor-in-chief of that journal, alleging what you suspect. Say that we submitted this, and this was stuck in review or for many weeks or months, and we didn't hear about it. And now this in between something very similar has come out, and we feel that this is from one of the reviewers or somebody in the editorial board, and we want you to look into it. So editor-in-chiefs will conduct an investigation and see if that has actually happened. So it usually, I would say, very rare that something like that would happen, because of course you also have to understand that the reviewer or the editor who's stealing your idea potentially also runs the risk of getting caught, exposed, and their reputation being harmed. So I don't think that people do it or would take the chance of doing it. But if they're tempted and they do it, and you suspect that something like that is happening, you can definitely write to the editor-in-chief with what you think has happened, and ask for a fair investigation. Most editor-in-chiefs will do that.
Right. And
I think
yes.
Can
Yes.
so a very nice point, San. But Apurva, I want to tell you something. So it is said that if you are aiming to patent any idea or invention, so it should not be published or publicly disclosed before filing a patent application. So sometimes if you are planning for something, which is very innovative, or you want to patent something, so then this thing you have to keep in mind.
Okay.
But what Apurva pointed out actually happens. We used to get at least 3 to 4 complaints every year. And IGO basically mentioning that a similar idea has been published. And these reviewers are very smart. Those who steal this idea, they publish it in somebody else's name from their group. They don't become the primary author or even the corresponding author. And the series that they publish is invariably very large, much larger than the paper that they are reviewing. So even if somebody suspects them, they can't really prove it. They would always get under the umbrella that, we started this project much earlier. And it's the standard practice of a journal to send articles to reviewers who share similar interest or research pattern. So, it can easily be hidden. It's absolutely unethical, but well, it happens.
Right.
Another way, I think you could potentially, if you have something very innovative, I don't know if it applies to surgical innovations or those kind of manuscripts, but another way of preventing this from happening, if you have something very original and early on in your career, that it obviously won't happen with people who are well known in their field, but if you are early on in your career, is for a preprint. So you can get a preprint publication, so that you have staked your claim and the preprint is searchable and it is available. The only problem with the preprint is that not all journals will entertain manuscripts which have already been published as a preprint, although nowadays most journals do accept, as long as you disclose it and you share the link. So a preprint is also, the preprint basically is your original manuscript that is on a preprint server, open access, available to everybody to see. So that is a date stamp and your stake to the claim.
Right.
One
Okay.
quick quote about before we go to the next one. So about preprints is, so whoever is interested can look up the website called ASAP Bio, ASAP BIO, ASAP Bio. They are the ones who are leading the the preprint guideline creations and all of that. And there is one ASAP Bio online fellowship every year where they have 30 fellows and they get like 3,000 applications. But then some of you could also apply and think about becoming ASAP Bio fellows and champions of preprints in India, which hasn't taken off as such. So look at ASAP Bio for preprint. So it's a great point that Sayan has brought up.
Right. Thank you, sir. So the next scenario is for Dr. Basu. Ma'am, can you please change the slide?
4 surgeons wish to conduct a study to report the efficacy of a new intervention in thyroid eye disease. 2 belong to a private practice from different states in India. One is from government college, and one hails from a private, and one from non-profit institution. So, what are the ethical considerations for each one of them that they have to consider, and what changes if the co-author is from another country?
So you have 4 surgeons. They are all in different institutes. Somebody is in private practice, somebody is in government
Yes.
medical college, and they are going to conduct a study on a new intervention. So I think so this is something prospectively that they're going to do, right? Planning to do. So I think the first consideration is, I think that will come in the way is getting the IRB approval, because you have to get IRB approval at all the different sites that they are going to recruit the patients at or do the intervention at. Sometimes this is commonly overlooked, that people will get IRB approval at one site, but the current ICMR guidelines mandate that you have to get it at every site that this is happening. I think that for them it would be a good idea, because it's a collaborative and interventional study, etc. To also, if it's a clinical trial that they're designing, that has multiple groups, to also get it registered on CTRI, so that there's transparency. You could also potentially start off with a methodology paper that you publish as to what is exactly that you're going to do, so that adds an extra layer of transparency. People know how you planned. Can you get the slide back on? What was the second part of the question?
Yeah, sure, sir. 1 second.
What if the author is from another country?
So
One of the
author is from another country for academic trials. As long as there is no exchange of biological material, there are no regulatory hurdles, that's all right. If you have IRB approvals at the individual sites, that's absolutely okay. In terms of authorship, of course, when you're doing a collaborative work, particularly for those people who are in non-academic settings, it might be good to right at the outset to have this conversation. And it can be like, you were alluding to earlier, it can be an awkward conversation, that who's going to be what, and what is the criteria that will define what is. In many cases, when we sign MOUs, or we have this we meet and discuss this, plan the study beforehand. So sometimes the authorship is also discussed, like Dr. Hona was mentioning, that sometimes it's how many patients you're recruiting. If it's an interventional study, then whichever center has the highest number of patients gets that, or you decide beforehand who is going to write the paper and who's going to be. So those issues should be discussed beforehand, that there is a criteria, instead of getting into a conflict later on when the study is completed. So plan beforehand, get approval at multiple sites, and all the other side. Otherwise, I don't see a problem if an author is from another country being an issue, if they have the local IRB approval, and as long as nothing is exchanged, no biological material is exchanged. So it is right now, you can't send biological material from out of India. I don't know if you can receive, but you definitely can't send.
So if I'm from a private practice and I don't have any other thing in my city, who do I approach for my
IRB?
Yeah.
You can approach any organization that has an IRB, which is within 50 kilometers of your geographical area. So any institute, it doesn't have to be an ophthalmology institute.
Right. So you can have an independent IRB as well, paid IRBs, but then, well, they don't do too well.
Independent as in one of my own?
No, there are independent IRBs which are paid IRBs. They charge you for a review. They don't do it too well. They are very quick. They are like almost like, within a couple of days, you would get an approval. You have a cursory meeting online in which you present your protocol, and then they approve it. But they charge. But they're all accredited, by the way. So you have to have an IRB which is accredited.
But you said they don't do too well. What did you
Too
mean?
well in the sense that they don't go too much into the depth of the study. They won't give you suggestions. Whatever you present is okayed by them without much of questioning.
Right. Dr. Pathapratham sir, do you have any views on the same?
No, already discussed. I don't have any.
Right. Thank you so much. And the one emphasis that I would like to highlight here is that um, the entire series or the entire series of questions have been laid out in a way so that the new researchers or the budding researchers are very clear about how do you initiate your research, how do you go about things. You all can always post your questions to us later as well. We can always look at the questions and write up to you. You can even write your questions to the help desk, and we can
The
help you new researchers or the budding so go ahead. And any other questions that anybody would like to ask before we request Dr. Apurva to give a vote of thanks?
I wanted to ask if there is any legal system existing to handle any disputes or plagiarism, academic plagiarism. Like, is there any standard punishment for committing the same?
There is no standard punishment as such, but of course, there are criteria, and you can actually complain to that particular journal where the where this has happened, where this article has been published, and also to the original journal from where it has been lifted. When that happens, the editor generally first contacts the corresponding author of the article and forwards the complaint. And if there is satisfactory response with justification, then the editorial committee decides whether it is really the case where some punishment needs to be given or not. If at all there is significant amount of dishonesty or unethical practice, then the head of the institute from where the author has hailed has to be informed. That is mandatory. And each institute has its own internal ethics committee to review the process. Some have suspension as the highest form of punishment. Some have demotion. Some have, they can even stop their increment, etc. Some even terminate. So it depends on the institute.
So you mean to say, sorry.
Editor kind of conveys this with evidence to the head of the organization, beyond which editor cannot do anything to that particular individual except for blacklisting that author for several number of years, depending on the journal policy.
So you mean to say, Dr. Nava, that if somebody has not been included ethically as a part of a research which they duly deserve to, then that person can claim?
Well, absolutely. If a person has enough evidence that he has contributed to the research project significantly, or a bulk of his cases have been used in the project without any acknowledgement or without any authorship, and if he has evidence, he can complain to the journal. And there are many instances where journals have actually taken action on this. But nobody does that because they don't want to create trouble unnecessarily for their own juniors and colleagues. People don't do it generally, but that is their benevolence, but it is actually punishable.
Right.
And on social media, like when the same is being done on social media, like people copy the pre and posts without acknowledging the person.
Pre and post copying, you can't help it in social media. Most of the things that are circulated are copied. So
I have a couple of comments on that. So first and foremost, how do you approach when there is plagiarism? And so the whole matrix is laid out on the COPE website. It's Committee of Publication Ethics. And so all of you who are interested can actually sign up to the COPE newsletter, which comes once a month.
Yeah.
And they actually discuss case-based approaches as well as new things happening in the sphere of publication ethics. Then there is one there is a overall, that COPE will really tell you what to do and how to do it. So that was one input, and quickly forgetting the other input. Yeah, so blacklisting authors, there is no sort of a database as such, so then we can't do much. But then I've seen authors who have actually copy pasted like for like, and then actually they have submitted a paper like 2 months later. It looks quite very different, but it's been submitted to the same journal, and the same journal also has sort of taken it up and actually reviewed and then published the paper. So then how do editors keep have a
very
thing
difficult
on that? It's very difficult because say in IGO there are like 4,000 submissions. It's almost impossible to so then there is no database which actually tells you whether it's the same
See,
author.
Sunny, you remember some authors actually created a different account, a new account, and then they submitted.
Exactly. So that's
Yeah.
what people do,
So
you know. So
they
they
keep,
will
there are
not do
100 things
that.
there are a lot of tricks that they
Very
play
difficult
around
to
with,
crack.
but it's sometimes very difficult to even know what, who has submitted what and track what has been previously rejected. But then there is retracted author database now, retracted manuscript database, which is, I think, quite useful.
Right.
One small comment I'll make in addition to what is being discussed is that if you feel vulnerable and you don't want to get exposed or get into trouble as a whistleblower, is something that you want to do, then there is also the option of, there's a website called pubpeer.com. So you can make an anonymous account, and if there is any scientific misconduct or you feel that authorship has not been fairly given or denied, or there is plagiarism or manipulation of data or images, you can make a post there. It's like a discussion thread. And usually the journal will get tagged, the editor and the editorial team will get tagged, and they will get in touch. And the corresponding author also gets an email from PubPeer that, a comment about your paper has been posted. And usually sometimes there's a conversation between the corresponding author and the person who's complaining, and it gets resolved. And if the journals usually will take cognizance of it, and suo moto, they might start an investigation. So if you don't want to reveal yourself and write to the editor-in-chief, because editor-in-chiefs may not, or the editorial team may not necessarily forward anonymous letters to the editor-in-chief, but PubPeer is an avenue that you can pursue.
Also, if you have taken assistance for paper writing or for statistics or something like that, which people take from me, then people, large journals like AJO, BJO actually ask for a declaration from the person who has done this, saying that, I have contributed and, I have been remunerated or not, and that, I sort of, I don't want to be an author in this, or, to that extent. So you need to give it to the authors, and they need to actually submit it to the parent journal. So then, the lot of those regulations have come in now. So that's also happening.
Right. So thank you everybody for all the time that is put in, and we wanted to make sure that we have covered it exactly in time and just not extend the webinar as usual. But thank you so much, and I request Dr. Apurva to please give the vote of thanks.
Thank you, everyone. First, I would like to thank all our viewers who have logged in on Zoom and on YouTube. Thank you for coming in and listening to the debut webinar of Research Cell. I think it was really fantastic. We had a very vibrant discussion discussing some of the most burning questions we all had. I definitely benefited a lot from this webinar. I would like to thank our expert faculty, Dr. Santosh Honavar, Dr. Sayan Basu, Dr. Sabyasachi Sengupta, Dr. Pathu Pratim Mazumdar, for taking out their valuable time and answering all our questions so patiently and in such great detail. And I think Rolika and Ayushi deserve a round of applause for designing this and making such a great webinar. Kudos to both of you, and hope we have a lot more of this. Thank you, Anujit and Drishti, for pitching in for this. And we thank the organizing team, including Miss Manjula from Numerotech. Thank you so much. I had a great time. We all had a great time. Over to you, Rolika.
Oh, thank you, everyone. And I think Ayushi, you want to take the selfie part. You can do that.
Everyone on Zoom can turn on their videos. Rolika, you will take the selfie.
Sure.
I'm taking, don't worry.
Okay. All right.
We can all make this.
Thank you, everybody. And those who have joined all the 12 webinars who will be taken care of, and we'll be giving an award of excellence to all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We can sign off, Manjula ji. Thank you.
Okay, doctor.